Hello, everyone, and welcome to God in All Things. I'm Tori.
And I'm Kariana.
And we are going to be discussing Catching Fire today. We're continuing on with the Hunger Games series. If you are new to our podcast, welcome. Here we discuss literature, film, and all of the gospel principles we can learn from them.
Or at least one gospel principle.
Yes, or at least we focus on one. We do focus on one, but sometimes we may throw in other things just by default.
There's so many.
Yes, so much to talk about. And like I said, we're continuing with the Hunger Games series. So we'll start off with a little bit of a summary specifically for the second one, or more like a synopsis. It's not really a summary, I guess, but we will start there. Like I said, it's continuing on from where the Hunger Games left off, and Katniss and Peeta have survived and are attempting to ease back into normal life. But things in Panem are far from calming down. After their trick with the berries, Katniss has inspired a new hope in the districts, one that President Snow will do anything to quench. And most of the book, unfortunately, is a lot of that back and forth and can get pretty tragic, honestly, but it is also very empowering the way Katniss handles things. So some personal experiences. I mentioned in our Hunger Games episode that I read these really quickly over just a week or two when I was in 6th grade, 7th grade, and this one definitely was my favorite. I think it's a lot of people's favorites. It's just the most, like, we know the characters and things are really starting to happen, and so there's a lot of plot going on, whereas the first one, it has a lot going on, but it's really a world and character introduction. Like, it's not like we have these, I mean, they're big stakes, but they're much more, like, limited as far as scope. And then the third one is big and grandiose, but a lot of it is internal turmoil. And so I feel like Catching Fire has a nice balance between the action plot that the first one has, but also a lot of the psychological plot that the third one has a little bit more of. So yes, I really love this one. I love the movie as well, and I'm excited to talk about it because it's fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, we both kind of talked about it on the Hunger Games one, so I don't have much to add either, but I did, after reading the Hunger Games for the last episode, I said, I need more right now. And I just sat down and read Catching Fire, even though I was like, I'm not even gonna remember it as well when we record the episode. I was like, I just gotta read it so fast. And then I ended it and I was like, I need to read Mockingjay, but I didn't. I held off on that one.
Way to hold back.
I think mostly because I had my family book club book that I needed to read and I was behind on. So it would have been irresponsible. But so absolutely loved it. I thought it's just so engaging. The writing is just so engaging and fun, and the story is so interesting, and I'm just very impressed. Very, very impressed. So lots of fun.
Yeah, I guess we'll just pretty much get right into it, starting with the gospel principle itself, which I'll let Kariana introduce this time.
Cool. So we wanted to talk about remembering who the real enemy is. A word that we would use more in the gospel is probably adversary, focusing on who our adversary actually is. And I think that came from, I tried finding it in the book, but I couldn't. Did you look in the book at all for it?
Yes.
Okay, Did you find it?
I did.
Okay, do you want to talk about where that is?
So this idea came from a quote in the book that's actually said by Haymitch, and it occurs right before they go back into the game. Spoiler alert. If you're listening to this, I mean, it's the second book in the series, so you're just gonna get that. But right before they're going in, it's the night before, and they're having a conversation, and just before Haymitch leaves the room, he says, Katniss, when you're in the arena, he begins, then he pauses. He's scowling in a way that makes me sure I've already disappointed him. What? I asked defensively. You just remember who the enemy is, Haymitch tells me. That's all. Now go on, get out of here.
I think in the movie it's Finnick who says it.
Both of them
do.
So Haymitch says it, and then when Finnick says it later, it reminds Katniss.
That.
Because in the book, just to kind of show the difference between the book and the movie, in the book, in her mind, she thinks she has a memory of Haymitch at that moment and remembers him saying that.
Okay.
But in the movie, to show it, they have Finnick say it so that it reminds her, so that you as the viewer know what's going on in her head. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Anyway, so as far as the gospel principle goes, that's where the idea came from, since that's not really like a typical gospel principle that we hear all the time.
Yeah.
So Yeah, remembering who the real enemy is has always kind of been a struggle for God's church. And we recently read in Come Follow Me, Romans 14, where Paul advises the saints not to judge or discriminate against each other on minor issues. And the example he uses is eating non-kosher food items, since he was dealing with a religion filled with devout Jews and converted Gentiles, converted Jews as well, previously devout Jews. For us, this would be like denouncing someone for drinking coffee, or more common issues that we kind of deal with these days are maybe receiving or not receiving a vaccine, or supporting or not supporting a certain political candidate, and things like that. These are debates that we allow to break down the unity within the church, turning us against each other, which is exactly what the adversary wants. So Paul and Suzanne Collins both remind us to remember who the real enemy is and join together in righteousness rather than tearing each other down for reasons that don't actually have an eternal impact.
So great. I'm actually really excited to talk about this because I do think it's a big thing just in today's world to point fingers and treat each other as enemies. And I think it's a very pharisaical idea to be like, because you're not doing this, you're a bad person. Like you yourself are bad or evil. Whereas it's actually like there's a different power that is who we're actually fighting, and it's really just sin. Like you could say Satan as well, but really it's sin itself that we're fighting. Right. Satan's just promoting that, but it's sin that we're fighting, and that's who the enemy is, and our own personal struggles and temptations that we give into are what the enemy is, not other people necessarily, because at one point before we came to this earth, we were all on the same side. In the pre-earth life, we all chose to come here, and we're on Christ's side, and regardless of what people choose here, we are all started on the same team. So we need to hang on to that. So let's get into the plot of the book, and we'll discuss that alongside it as we go along. So the book starts off with Katniss. She's out in the woods. She's just pondering on things coming up. It's, I think, a day before the tour starts. So it's the Victory Tour. This is an event where the winners or the survivor of the previous Hunger Games, the winner of the previous Hunger Games, gets to tour through all the districts.
Gets to. She's so excited.
And goes to parties and gets to give speeches and all of that, and gets to look at all the families of the people they killed. And it's really just, it's right in between the different Hunger Games. So it's kind of that mid-year situation. And so it's just to keep that on people's minds so people don't really get a break. And so, yeah, it's really sad, and Katniss is not looking forward to it, of course. She talks about how things have changed since she's gotten back, so she now hunts for Gale. So Gale is now working in the mines, and she has so much money being a winner, but he refuses to take any of it. And so she will do the hunting for him while he's working in the mines, and for his family. We also see that Peeta and Katniss's relationship is strained as well. Gale and Katniss's relationship is strained just because of what happened with Peeta in the games, and the situation where Gale has to rely on her, which neither of them, I mean, she's okay with him relying on her, but neither of them like to rely on other people, and so that's getting in the way. And yeah, Peeta and Katniss are also struggling because Peeta found out that she was faking the whole time and realized that, whereas he was actually being pretty honest overall with his feelings, and so there's some complications there. And yeah, it's just a very difficult time. But it is a beautiful time where we get to see the community again. I think that's my favorite, like revisiting the books, my favorite part about these books is the community aspect that's not really shown in the movies for obvious reasons. They don't want to pay more actors. But in the book, we're able to see a lot more interactions with other members of the community. And they really just have so much support for Katniss as a person, even though she doesn't really realize it's for her. Yeah. She kind of assumes it's for other reasons, but people really respect her, and we see a little bit more of that in this early part of the book, and it's just really, really great. But anyway, it starts off happy, and then Katniss goes home after hunting, and who should she find there but President Snow has come to visit and threatens her. So let's go into that scene, because I think this is very poignant because it's kicking this book off with her attention being focused on an individual who really is the enemy overall, because he is the most powerful man and he holds all the strings. Everything that goes on, there may be a lot of other people who support what he does, but he's the one making all the decisions, really, ultimately. So, oh yeah, before I go into that, there was this moment that got brought up talking about, so she's been keeping a lot of her hunting stuff at their old house in the Seam, whereas they're in a new Victor's house, her and her mom and sister, but technically her mom and sister still are recorded as living at the old house. It's just Katniss who technically can live in the house, in the new house. It's not like a hard, fast rule. It's just like, as far as records go, there. And as soon, if Katniss were to die, then her mom and sister would go back to the Seam, and yeah. So it's not, and I thought that was interesting because I was like, wow, one of the first things the Capitol attacks, even when you win the games, but also when you get in the games, is your family. Like, and your relationship with them, which is so what Satan does too. Like, he wants you to feel alone. He wants you separated from especially your family. He does not want family units because those are very divine things. And yeah, he's not about that. And so I find it interesting that right from the get-go, we're seeing the Capitol tear her away from her family, separate her, and then also just attack her relationship with other people in the community, like Gale, even her best friend. Like, they make it seem like he's her cousin in order to keep it from like getting in the way of the relationship with PETA, and just all of these things. And that's really what Satan does first, what our true enemy does. Satan, sin, temptations, that enemy separates us from other people and makes us feel alone and breaks up relationships that should be divine.
Yeah, you can push it even farther than that too. I mean, with the fact that the Victor's kids aren't immune from the games, Victor's kids can still be involved in it. And so even when the Victors get bestowed all of these privileges, they get treated special in every single way, but the one thing that would actually like matter or mean anything, they're still not immune from. And it pushes Katniss to even not want to have children. And I would totally compare that to things that Satan is doing today. You know, today Satan is totally, I mean, the family is ordained of God, like you're talking about. It's the most important relationships we have. And yeah, I mean, the smartest thing Satan can do is tear those relationships apart or encourage people to not even create them in the first place because of the fear that goes along with it.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's very key to everything else that we see throughout this book, is that idea of very personal destruction. And so, like I said, we have President Snow come to her home, and she says that he smells of roses and blood, which is just so descriptive and disgusting, but it just makes, there's just something about that combination that feels like powerful. You know what I'm saying? Like, he has power, and power and cruelty is who he is. And it also makes me think of the idea of Satan telling us lies mixed with truth. And so
that's sweet mixed into the sickly, the or
blood,
the bitter,
the destruction. Yeah. And so he and she describes him as a snake several times, and he really is like very much symbolically representative of Satan as a figure. This man coming into her home and threatening her, and twisting truth, because he's telling her things like, you know, you don't want a war, and it will just be so bad, and all the fallout will be awful. And I'm excited for us to get into the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes in a few months, because in that it explores that idea a little bit more of why he would feel that way.
Right.
But in the meantime, for this one, we just see him make really compelling arguments and things that, like, they both honestly want the same thing. President Snow just has a lot less empathy and care in doing it. Like, for him, he wants to avoid the war. Katniss also wants to avoid a war, which is what we see throughout this, but the thing is, President Snow thinks that this is better.
Right.
And that this is a better place, a better situation for their country than a war would be. Whereas Katniss begins to understand that a war, while devastating, is what they have to do in order to get a better place, because this is horrible and this can't stand the way things are now. But President Snow, it's almost like President Snow is more afraid, and he cares more about himself and his own people than he does about the kingdom as a whole, which I think we often get caught in. Like you said at the beginning, often God's church, that's a thing that's difficult, is putting the word enemy to the wrong people.
For sure.
Instead of embracing and strengthening everybody as a whole, we want to strengthen those, our own kin, and not spread that love. And that's Satan. That's a satanic way of doing it, especially now that we've been like studying the New Testament and learning about how God told Peter that it's time to teach the Gentiles as well. Like, that invitation's been given. We're ready to be able to spread more to others, to make God's kingdom available to everyone. So anything that keeps that from happening is going against God's plan, which is playing into the hands of Satan and sin.
One of the scripture verse that I love that relates to this is Moses 7:18. It says, "And the Lord called his people Zion, because they were of one heart and one mind, and dwelt in righteousness, and there was no poor among them." And what you just said right there made me think of that, where President Snow is worried about the welfare of his direct kinsmen, his people there in the capital, and he doesn't care if everybody else is poor for their sakes, as long as they have what they want. And yeah, not kind of spreading that excessive wealth that they enjoy, even though it could definitely be spread a little bit more. Yeah. And it also made me think of thinking, you know, just kind of pushing President Snow like as a really Satan character, because I think there are a lot of interesting comparisons you can draw. He also, I think it's interesting that he comes in. You pointed out that he comes in with kind of threats. He comes into Katniss's home, invades with these threats, and he twists people into doing what he wants. It's like almost, it's this, I don't want to say is controlling people's actions. I'm trying to find this like balance between, it feels like he's taking away people's agency, but which, you know, part of Satan's plan, right? And then, but like doing it in a way where people are still technically making their own choices, but he's twisting things, like you said, twisting truths and encouraging people to do things that go against what they actually want. Does that make sense? The way that that temptation,
he's limiting agency by not giving people the proper information.
Right. Yeah. And so it's like when we allow Satan inside of ourselves to convince us of things that aren't true, then it twists our ability to recognize what we're supposed to do and pushes us in a wrong direction. And so ultimately we're limiting our own agency. Satan only has as much power as we give him, but which is a difference between him and President Snow. But it's kind of an interesting comparison there, where it's this agency limiting manipulation into doing the wrong thing. Yeah. There's the succinct way of what I'm trying to say.
Yes, a little bit of a complex idea, but yes, basically he's keeping people away from the truth and being able to make decisions with open eyes. Yeah. Which, and we see that more and more as things go on, and we learn about other information that's being kept from them regarding like District 13 and things like that.
Which is why we talk about God and the gospel being what actually sets us free, right?
Exactly,
it's easy to see rules and restrictions as binding, but
the truth will set you free.
When you know the truth and what your options actually are, you're actually freer to make your own decisions.
Yes, absolutely. So then we do get started on the tour, and Katniss ends up telling Haymitch about this whole experience. She ponders who she can tell, and she feels like Haymitch is really the only one that she can tell. And so she tells him, and he's basically like, you're just gonna have to embrace that this is your life now, is being with PETA and continuing to be brought out and faking it and doing all that stuff you hate. Like, that's just what you have to do now. And he knows because he's already lived that. Like, maybe he hasn't been threatened on the same level as Katniss as far as President Snow coming to his house and doing that. But he has lived the victor's life, and that's what it is. It's basically you're a slave after you win. So he's very honest with her, and so we see them go on this tour. I think we mentioned in the last episode, so I'll just briefly mention it because I think it's really sweet. While Katniss is getting prepared for the tour, she's getting all her makeup and hair done and stuff, and she has her prep team come in, and her mom is asked to show them how to do the braided hair thing. And at first Katniss was annoyed with them because they were being all, they're just kind of shallow by nature of being from the capital and stuff, and she was annoyed with them, but they're very sweet when her mom is teaching them how to do her hair, and she just is really appreciative of their kindness in regards to that. And she's like, I feel bad about how I go around feeling so superior to them. Who knows who I would be or what I would talk about if I'd been raised in the capital. And in connection to this, I think it is important, like in this situation, these people are being kept in as much ignorance as the districts are, just in a different way. For sure. And maybe even more so, because they don't understand.
They don't know anything.
The poverty levels, and they just don't fully comprehend what's happening. And so they're in a limiting agency situation as well.
Absolutely.
And so she is I love that she's so understanding of, like, they're not the enemies. The enemy really is Snow, but it's easy, and those who actively choose to follow him with more knowledge.
Yeah.
Whereas these people who really just don't understand,
just the masses in the capital.
Yeah, they've just grown up being surrounded by beauty and good food and just whatever they need right at their fingertips. And so it makes sense that they would be like that. But when they do have moments where they know how to be kind, they choose to be kind.
Yeah.
And I think that's very telling of who they are as people. And I think that's very telling of most people, is I'm like, if they in certain contexts try to do what's right based on what they do understand, then they're definitely not the enemy. They're just at a different part of the journey and have come from a different situation, and that impacts things.
Yeah, I think you could totally compare that group to maybe like a sheltered group within the church, like those kids who not to like call anybody out, I mean this all in the kindest way, but who like aren't allowed to watch PG-13 movies until they're like, an adult. And people who just kind of follow those like more extreme rules, not dissing on those rules, everybody do what's right for you, but I just know that like as a teenager it was really hard for me to take those kids seriously, right? Because it was like they just didn't really know or understand anything. And it was like, okay. And they were like, oh, you're wearing a tank top. And I was like, okay, like, what do you even know, Yeah. And I definitely got that from my mom, because my mom would say the same things about lots of women, where it was she would always complain about these women in Relief Society and stuff talking about the atonement, and she's like, they don't even know like what the atonement is or how to use it, like they've never had to use the atonement, which is totally judgmental in its own way, and so it's this like it's this perception. I've heard it described as pride from above and pride from below, and I love that Katniss like acknowledges her pride from below, looking at these people who are, I don't know what the right word is, supposedly like superior to her, and feeling superior to them, and versus their pride from above, like seeing this like girl who has all this leg hair and doesn't know how to take care of herself. And so it's this, but both sides, like you're saying, really live in ignorance and have something else to learn, and they could really learn different things from each other if they opened up their minds.
Yeah, absolutely. So then continuing on, so they do go on the victory tour, and we have the sweet, I'm just going to briefly mention it because it's so cute, and in Mockingjay, when we get to that, there's a scene that makes me cry every time because of, and it's connected with this scene. So they leave District 12. I think they started off with a bit of a party, like a going away party in District 12, and then they leave. And on the train, I believe it's on the train, or maybe no, it's on the train for sure. Katniss gets frustrated with Effie because she's just going off about all these plans that Katniss is like, I do not care. Like, I'm out of here. And so she's kind of rude to Effie, and then she leaves, and then she's trying to just be by herself. I think the train has stopped. That's right. The train has stopped, and so she gets off the train and just walks around in the snow a little bit, and someone comes out, and she's like, assuming it's Haymitch coming to tell her off, and she's like, I'll apologize to Effie, I promise. And it's Peeta, and he comes to her, and he's like, he basically is very understanding. He's like, you know, like, you don't really need to apologize to anyone. And basically he says, you don't need to even apologize to me. And this is why Peeta is so much better than Gale. Anyway, so he comes in and he's like, you don't even need to apologize to me. Like, I know you kept us alive. Like, I understand that. And he's basically like, if you could stop treating me like a wounded puppy, then I'll stop acting like one, and we can be friends. And so they're trying to mend this relationship, and they get to know each other, and Peeta's like, what's your favorite color? And they like tell each other. It's just like a really good, like, their first real conversation that's not just about the games and about their situation. Like, it's just a genuine, like, friendship moment, and it's just very, very sweet. It's just a very good moment. I mean, I guess if you're talking about remember who the real enemy is, often Katniss has had moments of thinking Peeta's the enemy. Yeah. And just realizing, like, he's just in the same situation as her, and he also has had his feelings hurt, which she's pretty understanding about too, which I appreciate, like, throughout, that even when he is not being very nice to her, she's kind of like, you know, I understand, like, it was a hard situation. Even I was confused. I still don't know how I feel. So I feel bad that I did that, but also, like, it's just kind of the way it is. Like, it's just the way she feels. But, we see a little moment of that, of recognizing who the real enemy is, and it's not Peeta, despite everything that's happened. But then we get to the one scene in all of the Hunger Games that makes me, like, cry every single time. Okay, there are some scenes that maybe I'll cry less sometimes, or I won't cry sometimes when I see it. This one wrecks me. So they go to District 11. Oh, I can't. And they get to give a speech in front, and so of course they see the families of the fallen tributes, one being Thresh, who saved Katniss's life. Not only saved her life, but spared her life, because he could have killed her. And then we see Rue's family. And yeah, it's just really upsetting. So Peeta ends up saying that he's going to give 1 month of their winnings every year for the rest of their lives to the families of the fallen tributes.
I love him just knowing that Katniss is, like, fine with that. That's my favorite thing about that moment, is he doesn't even need to consult her. He's just like, yeah, Katniss will love this idea. Yes. He knows.
Anyway, and so another good moment of her recognizing who the real enemy is talking to these families about their fallen tributes in such a respectful and kind way. Not like, oh, they were my enemies, sorry, I just had to kill them. She recognizes that they were children. And so about Thresh, she says, I always respected him for his power, for his refusal to play the games on anyone's terms but his own. And so she really saw him, even though they didn't have a lot of interactions. And then then she turns to Rue's family. Can I get through this? I don't know. I definitely, like, reading this book, I didn't really cry at any part except for this part. I had all the tears. Anyway, I think for this, I'll be all right. But she says, but I feel as if I did know Rue, and she'll always be with me. Everything beautiful brings her to mind. I see her in the yellow flowers that grow in the meadow by my house. I see her in the mockingjays that sing in the trees. But most of all, I see her in my sister Prim. My voice is undependable, but I am almost finished. Thank you for your children. I raise my chin to address the crowd, and thank you all for the bread. which was when she sent it. I love that she connects Rue to her sister. It just shows that despite the Capitol wanting to tear family apart, she keeps family so close, even in the midst of a situation where she could have seen Rue as an enemy, just an enemy. She sees her as family, and that's why family is divine, and we should appreciate it more.
Absolutely. Amen.
So we continue on, and they continue through the tour. It's really sweet. We have moments where Katniss is having nightmares. So does Peeta, but Peeta mostly just doesn't sleep. He kind of just wanders around, which is so sad. When you read about that, it says, Peeta, who spends much of the night roaming the train, hears me screaming as I struggle to break out of the haze of drugs that merely prolong the horrible dreams. So she's been given sleeping drugs, and they're just making it so that she can't wake up from the traumatic nightmares that she has because of the trauma from the first games. And he's so... I love this so much. So it says, he manages to wake me and calm me down. Then he climbs into bed to hold me until I fell back asleep. After that, I refused the pills, but every night I let him into my bed. So, like, the only relief she can get, either of them can get, is just being close to each other, because they just understand each other. Yeah. And, really, within these traumatic experiences, the only time they felt safe was when they were just together in that cave. Yeah. I mean, they weren't fully safe, but you get the feeling that was where they felt most safe. And even now, like, Peeta's really the only one. Peeta and Haymitch, I would say, are the only ones who she knows really gets what she's going through. And you can sense there's just a different relationship there with both of them. Yeah. And so I love that they comfort each other and are there for each other. And why Katniss cannot realize that she loves Peeta is beyond me. But
it's one of those things where, like, it's so cute, but at the same time I'm like, they're literally sleeping together every night. Like, are you kidding me right now? Girl, you cling to him all night long, but, like, you cannot recognize that it would be a good thing to just be with him.
Right? Like, as if you would feel the same with Gale. You wouldn't.
No. You wouldn't feel the same with anyone. That's all love is. That's all you need.
They're too cute.
It's fine. It's fine. It's frustratingly adorable.
And the situation's complicated, and she has a lot of trauma beyond just the games.
And they're also still children.
Yes, they're also still young, but they just love each other, and it's great. Okay. So then Katniss is told by Snow in a very subtle way that her work to try to quell the uprisings is not working. People do not believe their love story still, which was what he came to threaten her about. I guess we didn't really mention that, but basically he's trying to get her to really put on the show because people are starting to want to rebel, and he wants her to calm them down by convincing them because they don't believe her.
But everything she does is just so inciting to rebellion.
Yep. So they get engaged. Peeta and her get engaged on television, and it's still not enough. So then she goes home being like, okay, what do I do? And she tells Gale, and she's like, let's run away. We'll have to run away. And of course, as soon as he hears Peeta's coming, instead of being like, oh yeah, let's save people's lives, he says, no, that's so annoying. I don't want you to bring your fake fiance.
I'm just gonna stay here.
Freaking Gale. Anyway, so, at first he's like, okay, fine. But then as she talks, he's like, the fire is put under him. And he's like, I don't even care. And, it's a situation where I see both sides. Like, Katniss can't just run away. Like,
right.
It's not going to fix anything. Yeah, not really. It's not going to help anybody for her to run away.
And let's be real, they'd probably just find her.
Yeah, they weren't going to make it. And so,
there's no way.
Yeah, that's too many people, first of all. And second of all,
and it's her. They're watching her.
Yeah, they're watching everything she does. So it's very just unrealistic. But I don't think Gale's very understanding about it and isn't really listening to her.
I would say it's Gale breaking apart the unity. Like, this is Gale not seeing who the true enemy is. Because, I mean, we know he's hated the Capitol longer than Katniss, right? In the first one, he would go on his tangents and railings against the Capitol out in the woods. But, like, and he's like, it's this problem where he's willing to do something for Katniss because he loves her and sees her as family. But then as soon as Peeta's involved, it's like, it's just too much emotion going on in his head, and he's letting those feelings get in the way of what could be the right thing to do, even if running away is the wrong thing to do, you know. If he's agreeing to it because he thinks it's a good idea, he's then letting PETA get in the way of what he sees as a good idea.
Yeah.
And he's targeting PETA as the enemy that he's not.
Yeah.
And that's totally exactly what we're talking about with church members, you know, judging and discriminating and breaking down that unity over when, like, that's not who we should be focused on and worried about.
Because I think, I mean, we've mentioned President Snow as being the real enemy, but I think even deeper than that, there's some semblance of continued violence being the real enemy.
Yeah.
Because for Katniss, like, she goes into war and goes into fighting because she has to, because there's no other choice.
Right.
But that's not a state she wants to be in, whereas Gale is all for it.
Right.
You know? And, like, President Snow wants to avoid this big war, but he doesn't realize that the Hunger Games are a war in and of themselves.
Right.
Just on a smaller scale, but he's still perpetrating violence. Whereas Katniss doesn't want any of that unless absolutely necessary.
That's a really good point.
Which is the difference between them. So then they go back to the district, and Gale ends up getting whipped because he's caught coming in and he was poaching, and so they whip him, and Katniss goes, well, it's cute because Katniss goes to PETA, and PETA's like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want, which PETA's the best. I'm sorry. Oh gosh, sorry if you're Team Gale, but I'm for sure not. Anyway, not for Katniss. Like, it's not like Gale's the worst thing ever, it's just like not for Katniss. Anyway, but yeah, PETA's like, I will go with you if that's what you want to do, but I know you're not gonna go. And she's kind of pissed off about that, but he's like, no, like, genuinely, I'll go with you. Like, I promise I'll go with you. I just really don't think you're going to.
He just knows her better than she wants to admit.
Knows her better than she knows herself sometimes. Yeah. And he's proven right. As soon as something goes wrong, she realizes she's not gonna run. So yeah, they're walking together, and that's when they see Gale, and Katniss and PETA and Haymitch all stand in the way to stop it. And then Katniss, for some reason, is like, of course I'm in love with Gale. Girl, stop. Just because you're really upset and distressed that he just got whipped almost to death does not mean you're in love with him. Like, it just means you love him. But, like,
she's literally ready to give up her life for PETA, and she's like, do I love him? And she's upset that Gale gets hurt, and she's like, I must be in love with him.
Yes. You're like, oh, Katniss, you are so wise and strong and courageous, but you are not emotionally, like, intelligent at all. So yes, all of this happens, and then so basically the District 12 gets really smacked down with new peacekeepers coming in, and we see, I love in the movies being able to see a little bit more of the background with that, because we see Plutarch Heavensbee, the new game maker, and President Snow having conversations about what to do to make Katniss look bad. And so this is part of that plan that they discuss. But anyway, so they have peacekeepers there, and they shut down the black markets. They have a lot more strict rules. There are things that Katniss says, like, people are whipped for doing that people had been doing for so long they forgot they were against the law.
Right.
And things like that. And I love it too, because connecting with our theme of this episode, there's a moment when Gale's getting whipped. There's a couple of peacekeepers who help them.
Yeah.
And these peacekeepers who have been there for a long time, there's one who is on the ground when Katniss, unconscious when Katniss gets there. And then there's another one who stands up and is like, I think that's actually the amount of lashings we're supposed to give for this
offense.
Thank you. And the new lead peacekeeper is like, oh, really? Is that the rule here? And she's like, yeah, even though Katniss is like, I mean, nobody knows because we don't do that. But usually the rule is for poachers who gets the first turkey leg.
Right.
Like, that's the attitude that's been around. But this peacekeeper is really just trying to help stop it. And so it's really amazing to see that another thing that I love in the books is, again, that community, and including these peacekeepers who are from the capital, but they are willing to make little rebellions of their own.
Yeah, it's really touching.
Yeah, it's very empowering. And so realizing that it's not necessarily the capital as a whole that is the enemy. it's those who are in power and have knowledge who are misusing it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're also just people. And, you know, they've been in District 12 for so long, they're not ignorant anymore. They know exactly what's going on, and they've developed relationships here, and they understand them. And I want to compare it to, like, some of the Romans that Jesus interacted with, you know. None of the stories are coming to my head, but like the centurion's servant, you know, some of those people who believe in Christ, but like come from this different place where they're not really in a place where they can fully embrace the gospel because it's just not like culturally possible. Yeah. But like they know the Jews, they know the people, and they love and respect them for who they are as people, and they know what's right versus wrong. And that's very much these peacekeepers here. They're like, this is wrong. Like, I don't know what the law is, and I don't know like what you guys are doing here, but this isn't right. And they're willing to step up and do something about it. And it's an awesome moment.
That's wonderful. So then we see Katniss. So there's all these SmackDown, more peacekeepers, and Katniss ends up sneaking out to go hunting, even though she probably shouldn't. And she goes to this house by this lake that her dad used to take her to, where she had talked to Gale earlier. And there's these two people who show up who are dressed in peacekeeper uniforms, and she's all nervous, but it ends up that they're from District 8, which District 8, she's learned recently, has officially rebelled.
Full-scale rebellion.
Yeah. They've had a fight with peacekeepers, a real battle. And in fact, we learned from these two. So these two women from District 8 come and tell her what happened. And I guess the peacekeepers ended up, they were fighting, and then the peacekeepers won, Capital won. And so they were like, go back to your daily routines. And then they were a little late to work. And just before they got there, the factory that they worked at was blown up by the peacekeepers. Because the peacekeepers had learned that was where a lot of the whisperings to rebel had started, was in this factory. And so they run away. They already had these peacekeeper uniforms. One was for actually one of their husbands, who was in the factory, and so he died. And so the other woman got to take that, and they ran away. And they're going to District 13, which supposedly was blown up at the beginning of all this, before the Hunger Games started, during that war. But they were saying that whenever the Capitol shows footage from District 13, there's always the same mockingjay that flies in the corner, and so they believe that they're just reusing footage, and that there's actually something else there, potentially that District 13 survived because they could go underground, and so that's where they're headed, which Katniss is like, I don't know about that, but whatever. So they go. So that's one of our first introductions to District 13, but also to the idea of the Capitol deliberately keeping things from people in a way that's like outside of the Hunger Games, I guess. Potentially impactful information that, they're keeping away from it. Because most of the other stuff we've learned about usually has to do with the games and a lot of the fakeness of it.
Right.
And what they actually do behind the scenes and stuff, which, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people kind of know. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So a lot of people probably recognize that this is entertainment, and so there's some other aspects to it.
Yeah.
Whereas this is like news that people think they're getting that is legitimately, intentionally faked.
Yes. That is false and could be impactful to a huge scale.
Yes. That would change everything.
So we're starting to see a little bit of the grander scale of everything that's happening with that. And then we get to the Quarter Quell, which is basically every 25 years from the start of the Hunger Games. There was an idea that every 25 years there would be a special Hunger Games where there would be an added dynamic as an extra reminder that the Capitol's in power and that we need to appreciate that, basically. And so
I thought in Hunger Games that the 74th annual Hunger Games was irrelevant, but turns out highly relevant number.
74th is important because now it's the 75th.
Yes.
And so it talks about the 25th Hunger Games. They had to vote. Oh gosh. I could not even imagine.
Oh my gosh.
They had to vote
not.
on who the tributes would be from each district. So like the district themselves would have to vote on which kids would go in.
There's no way.
Which I just, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. I
think the least realistic thing to me about this book series is how far the Capitol pushes without them going into rebellion anyway. Only for the sole fact, rebellion is hard to incite, but for the sole fact that it's their children, you know?
Yeah.
Attacking people's children, I mean, it's the fastest way to have a bunch of parents, you know, fathers of daughters saying, no.
You're not taking them.
Yeah, that's like the only thing about this. When I think about having to vote, I'm like, there's no way.
Yeah.
I don't think I could vote for somebody. I think I'd rather be whipped or shot. Like, there's no other option. How do you live with yourself?
Yeah, like to say I voted
for
to
that,
look in the
to
face
have to
of the
look at that
parent,
person's parent. Yeah. No.
Be like, I voted for your child to die, basically. Like, awful. But I guess if you psychologically manipulate people enough, unfortunately,
people
you can
will
do
give
a
in.
lot.
But people still have their agency.
So sad. Anyway, and then the 50th, which is the one Haymitch won, where they had double the tributes, so 2 boys and 2 girls. Also
Which
awful.
makes Haymitch way cooler, actually.
Haymitch way cooler, and you just want to give him a hug.
That's
like,
true.
Oh my gosh.
That's true.
It's bad enough to go through the Hunger Games, but to have to go through where even more kids are dying.
Yeah. And 3 people from your own district, too. Instead of that raises the chances that he had to kill somebody from his own district.
Especially when it's like you grow up and often you're just going to hang out more with your own gender.
Right.
Like you're gonna have to kill someone who could be like a friend.
Yeah.
Who's another guy
sure.
or whatever. Anyway, super, super sad. And then 75th.
So exciting. Quarter quill.
And it's definitely been rigged. I'm just gonna say that. I mean, it's rigged anyway. To have
Tori,
25 years.
President Snow would not rig the Hunger Games.
He would
like
never
that.
make a paper look old. Just to do this, but I'm like, it's too perfect. There's no, even Katniss is they did that on purpose for sure, because it's very pointed. So what it says, I'm just gonna read it. It's on the 75th anniversary, as a reminder to the rebels that even the strongest among them cannot overcome the power of the Capitol, the male and female tributes will be reaped from their existing pool of victors. Which, oh gosh.
Now they're taking away the one immunity that their children were already not immune, but the one thing that every victor thought they had
was they would never have to go back, and now they do. And especially Katniss, reason it's so rigged is because she's the only woman
female
from
victor.
Her district, and so she for sure is going in. There's no other option for her. Whereas for the male, it could be either Peeta or Haymitch. This episode has been divided into 2 parts. You have reached the end of part 1. Part 2 will be released the following Thursday. We hope you enjoyed the first half of our discussion. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at God in All Things Podcast. Additionally, if you are interested in seeing what Tori is currently reading, head over to her YouTube channel, Good Strong Words. Thank you again for listening. We hope you are having a wonderful day. Keep remembering to see God in all things, and we will see you next time. Bye!